It's great to see everyone today on this warm day. We're getting into the summer. We finished the spring last week. That was it. And winter before that. So it's so nice to have everybody back together on a nice warm day. And we're still bundling up with sweaters as if it's going to not be 70-something degrees today. But we welcome you to our Tuesdays with lecture series here, sponsored by the Friends of the Georgetown Library. For those who don't know me, it might be a few, my name is Bob Willey, and I've had the privilege over the last 6 years now, almost 7, to serve as president of the Friends of the Georgetown Library. It's been a wonderful experience with a wonderful group of people who are here serving the community and doing a wonderful job of serving the whole community here at the Georgetown Library. Pleased to be able to be in that position because that's what the Friends do, support the work that's going on here, particularly the children's reading programs, which is a fantastic program that's going on. Today we're very privileged. Oh, I should mention Tuesdays With is, some of you can give this talk better than I now, having heard it several times. 1997 bestseller, Tuesdays with Maury. And a wonderful book. If you've never read it, it's a nice book, and we often have it show up in our used book sale, incidentally. I'll get into a tangent on that. But it's a wonderful book that talks about the ongoing relationship between a student and his college professor that went far beyond that 18 to 21-year-old age period and continued on into the later life for both of them. And just a wonderful experience. And that's what our series is all about, our continuing learning, our continued education as we seek to get to know more, particularly about that community in which we live. Here in Georgetown, which is a really wonderful community, has rich history, wonderful things concerning nature, and a lot of good service that's going on here that we'd like to be able to share about with you through these lectures, as we've been doing it now in our 6th season of having Tuesdays With. We're actually starting to plan the 7th season about next week. We'll start working on that. Today, our Tuesdays With is with Dr. Deas Clark, who is pastor of the historic Bethel African Methodist Episcopal Church here in Georgetown, a wonderful church and a wonderful pastor. And we're so blessed to have her in the community, and an esteemed. Do you like the way we use that? Steve, I said, how do we describe this group? And he said, we're esteemed. Is that with hot water on you or something? The esteemed panel, which is a wonderful thing. I'll give an introduction for Dr. Clark, if I may, in just a few comments, but the panel, I understand, will be introducing themselves. But let me just talk a little bit about Dr. Clark. And usually, if those who have heard me before, I usually do the academic credentials and the experiential credentials. I want to give just a couple of personal things that I think are really special. Since the beginning of COVID, Dr. Clark has been a wonderful voice of encouragement to the Georgetown community through GAB. If you go on to GAB on Sundays, you will be able to hear her do her presentation in times like these. I love the phrase that she uses, that these are messages of light, help, and hope. And it has really been a wonderful encouragement. Now, I'm not voting whether to continue them or not. We were talking about that. But I just want to thank you on behalf of the community for what, not just the congregation of Bethel, but for the whole Georgetown community, and those messages that you began as COVID sort of cut us back from one another, but we maintain the fellowship and the encouragement as Dr. Clark has shared with us. And then the second thing is, there are a few of us who are here who are exercisers in the morning. We see each other regularly, walking or running or doing different kinds of things. But very, very special, and I don't know if it's any other day, but I've only seen you on Fridays. Only Fridays. Dr. Clark and Pastor Bessem from Prince George Wignaw Anglican Church take exercise and walk around the town together on Friday. And I don't know if they're praying for us or what they're doing, but they're always deep in conversation. It's one of those, I'd love to go along with them to find out what it is, but I asked Dr. Clark, what they're doing is solving major theological issues that have perplexed the church since the beginning of the history of the church. So they have solved every issue. This year they're working on all the political issues. But just to see the two of them, Dr. Bessem, or Mr. Bessem, Pastor Bessem, and Dr. Clark, taking those walks together, it's just such a special blessing to see them on Friday mornings, and so just the personal side of things. So we're pleased to have today with us Dr. Clark. I'll turn it over to you. A time on the celebration 160th anniversary of historic Bethel African Methodist Episcopal Church here in Georgetown. Dr. Clark, thank you.
Well, thank you, Bob. And let me just say that whenever I'm walking with Gary from St. George and we see Bob, I've never seen him without a smile. I've never seen him without a smile. And so to see someone such as this man, it encourages you along the way. And so, Bob, I want to thank you for being the sunshine of Georgetown. Well, once again, good morning and welcome to a reflection of Bethel. We've coined that term because it's easier to handle, a reflection of Bethel. In February of 2021, a man by the name of Henry Louis Gates produced a 4-part series on the Black church entitled, "This is Our Story, This is Our Song." Well, he shared how the Black church has always been a place of refuge and strength. In many instances, it is where we found significance and meaning. Through this 4-part documentary, Gates introduces to the nation some of the most prominent historians of the Black experience. In like manner, today I've been afforded the opportunity, and I count it a privilege, to share a reflection of Bethel, African Methodist Episcopal Church. But then I'm reminded that Psalm 145 and verse 4b says, "One generation shall praise thy works to another." Today, we sing praises to Bethel, and most of all, to God for being in this community for 160 years. Today, we seek to share a glimpse of the first independently Black-owned church in Georgetown County. We celebrate Bethel as a church that is relevant to our past, our present, and our future. Our esteemed panel, that's the key word today, our esteemed panel, they are Sister Eunice Brown, Reverend Charles Johnson, and Brother Steve S. Williams. Now, they are a rich composite of the positive influences made by Bethel through the years. Each panelist will briefly introduce themselves and share within their agreed allotment of time. We are offering a reflection and not a reenactment of history. Ladies and gentlemen, I present to you Sister Eunice F. Brown. Give her a hand as she comes.
Good morning. As she said, I'm Eunice Brown. I'm a retired educator with the Georgetown County Public School for over 35 years. And after I retired, but not stopped working, I wrote 2 books of poems. The latest one was done during COVID time, Melodies of the Heart, and Harvesting Blessing was done about 10 years ago. So these are the 2 books of poetry that I value most. So at this time, and also I share my poems with my church family. So today I will read the poem that I wrote for our 155th church anniversary, and it's also in this book. So the title of this poem is "Listen, My Children." Listen, my children, and listen well, of the story of Bethel I now tell. It started in 1863 when a church was planted under the banner of AME. Our founder and leader wanted to be spiritually free, in a place he can worship with like minds as he. Augustus T. Clark had a plan in sight. He informed the small band the time was right. These men of faith moved with one accord to build a church that was worthy of the Lord. The believers were hungry to worship in peace. They cried out for their faith to increase. Struggles or hardships didn't hold them back anymore. It was time to step up and open their own church door. They searched all over until they found this spot. Combining their wages, they bought this lot. A small wooden church was all they had. Praising God in it made them glad. The people came from the plantations around, uniting with Bethel and the new faith they found. Service were held in the wooden church next door until a bigger one was built to handle the overflow. The wealth they had was not as plentiful as today, but their grand heritage is still on display. Over a century and a half has come and gone. The legacy given still marches on. The surrounding ground played dual roles. Then a garden of peace was created for resting souls. The church now stands on hollow ground, where shouting hallelujah is distinct and profound. Listen, my children, and listen well. The story is yours for the legacy to dwell. Teach it to the children to come, a history they won't turn away from. It started with men and women who wanted to be spiritually free, to a God who commands our loyalty. And
Thank you, Sister Brown. And because it's a part of my vocation, I say sister, I say brother, you say miss, you say mister, but it's still Brown, no matter what you do. Now, our next panelist will introduce himself, but let me say this about him. Having been at Bethel now almost 7 years, from time to time when I encounter this man, he will always tell stories of the role Bethel has played in his life. And so now I want you to hear a non-AME, actually he's a Baptist, but God loves Baptists. No, it's not shade, because God loves Baptists as well. He does.
Just not as much.
Listen, give a hand now to Reverend Charles. Please feel free to use it.
Now that's an introduction, I'm telling you.
Not throw shade.
And the truth about it is I do talk about Bethel a lot because Bethel is who I am. Back in the, I want to say late 70s, there was a hit group and they made a song, and the name of the song was There's No Me Without You. Guess who made that song? It's a group by the name called the Manhattans. I know y'all don't remember them, but there was no me without you, and I can truly say that there would not be a me without Bethel. Because Bethel is where everything started with me as a life. They had a kindergarten that I wanted to go to, but my mother couldn't afford it. But my friends would go to the kindergarten, and they would tell me about the teachings that they got there, the food that they got there. And so I missed it, but I didn't miss it because my friends would always tell me about it. And when I became of age, my mother was Mercedes Johnson, and she had one rule in her house. that if you lived in her house and ate her food, you will go to church on Sunday. And that's what I did. I went to church every Sunday, and I rarely would miss a church. But I wanted to go to Bethel because Bethel offered so much more. It started off with a lady by Miss Rosalie. Anybody remember Miss Rosalie? She used to also be over the lunchroom at Howard School. And Miss Rosalie was over the Sunbeam Choir. And during that time, the choirs at Bethel, to be on the Sunbeam Choir, the youth choir, you had to, even if you can't sing, you had to sound good to be on the choir. And you had robes, and so Miss Rosalie, when I got on her choir, everybody was doing solos, and I wanted to do a solo, and she said to me, "Son, you sound pretty well, but you don't sing well, but I'm not going to put you off the choir." And then she gave me a hug to encourage me not to leave the choir. But, there was an old adage that was saying it took a village to raise children, and that's what was the signature of Bethel. Bethel taught us the protocol of churching. Things like you don't chew gum during service. Things like you don't talk to service. The ushers would come over and tap you on the shoulder, and if you didn't listen, they will ask you to step outside. And then they wouldn't beat you, but they'll call your parents and tell your parents your child didn't act well in church. So we learned the protocols of churching. Our Sunday school at Bethel was like trying to get into college. The rooms were so filled, and the people that taught the Sunday schools were all educators. And so they taught well. And so we got the basics of the Bible at Bethel. Even if we left it, we knew we got the basics of the Bible. And then there was Miss Howard, Miss Josie Howard. And by this time, I was getting ready to go into the 7th grade. So now you're leaving the Sunbeam Choir, and you had to, what's the word when you have to compete for something? Right, to get on the youth choir. And you had to sing to get on the youth choir. And so I got there and I sang for Miss Howard, and she played. She said, "Well, you're on the wrong key, Charles." And I don't know about the key. But again, she would not put me off the choir. And she allowed me to sing on the choir. And at my last year there was only 3 guys that stuck with me the entire year at Bethel. That was myself, Hermie Davis, and then another guy by the name of James Keith, and we call him Jimmy. But we stuck all the way. And what I finally realized that Miss Howard and those that did not put me away because I couldn't sing, they kept me around so that they could keep me out of trouble. They kept me around so that I could learn more about being around church and to be a churchy type person as I was growing up. And I got into my little stuff as a child, but I would always remember the teachings that they taught me at Bethel. And when I got in the 7th grade again, the AME have what they call the State Youth Congress, yeah. And that's when all of the AME youth come from all over South Carolina. And they convene at Allen University for one entire week. And it cost like $21 to go. Of course, we didn't have the money, but they raised the money for us to go. But you had to be a student you had to be a member at Bethel that comes to the church regularly, that you'd help around the church. That when they would think about the children, your name had to come up. And so they chose like 7 of us to go. And I was one of the one that was chosen to go to Allen University. And I went there every year until I got to a senior in high school. And what that did to me, that allowed me to learn about college. Because we stayed in the dormitories there. When we got there, we didn't go into the hotels. We stayed in the dormitories. And we went, and then they taught classes there. And so we learned a lot just being there. And again, you had to compete to go there. And I thank God for that opportunity to be chosen to go on the State Youth Congress. Then on the social side, we would also have, during that time, churches would open the doors to the youth. That kept us out of trouble. We liked to dance, we liked to have parties, and then it wasn't a sin to bring Michael Jackson in and music in, and you sang there because they always had chaperones there. And so we would go there and we would have a good time, and Ms. V.G. Manigault would be over us, and she would make sure that we have something to eat, and the parties was over like 10 o'clock at night, and it was just good for us so that we can socialize, and we knew that we could socialize without having to go to jail or drugs are involved. And then Ms. Manigault again, she came up with something, and she called all of the parents around at Bethel. She said, we need to start teaching our youth how to go into a restaurant and eat and read the menu properly. And so that's what they did. And they called my mother, and my mother would make a plate, and she would send the fork and the knife, and we'd have to sit at the table, and we have to know how to cut a steak, and you'd have to know when the waiter comes over and what would you like to offer. You don't have, well, I don't know. Get your hands off the table. You don't put your elbows on the table in a restaurant. And so they taught us the protocols and the manners of going into a restaurant. And for that reason, when I went into a restaurant after I left there, I knew the protocols of going into a restaurant and when the waiter comes, and I knew how to tip. Amen. And then Reverend Holman and Miss Holman came in, and they wanted someone to clean their house. So they chose myself and Jimmy to come and clean their house, and they'd pay us $3 on a Friday. And we would mop the floors, we would do the bathrooms, we would clean under the bed, and Miss Holman had about 1,000 shoes, and all of them had to be lined up, and so they taught us how, and so we would clean our whole house, and we got that, so we did that. And one day, as I was getting ready to leave, Reverend Holman called me over. He said, Charles, I want to talk to you a minute. I said, yes, sir. He said, you know, I see a calling on you. What you talking about calling? I didn't call nobody. He said, son, God has called you to preach the gospel. And when he said that, I ran. Not me. And any one of you all know when you run from God, you run into trouble. And so I ran until I got the message, and I would consistently hear Reverend Holman's voice about me coming to preach the gospel and preach the gospel. And that's when I ended up in the Baptist church. But I stop and think about my path, and that's why I say there's no me without Bethel. Everything that I am today, it came from Bethel, because I think about Bethel almost every day. The projects that's over on the west side was formed at Bethel. And did you know that most of the people at Bethel did not live in those parsonages, in those housing units? And they fought to get that there. And sometimes I would wonder, well, I wonder why they're building that when the members don't. It's because they cared about Georgetown. And they fought for civil rights. And they just wanted Georgetown, because Georgetown is a lovely place to be. Because most of us that love Georgetown, when we leave, we'll come back. And I was one of the ones that after I left the military, where you want to go at? And I was living in San Antonio, Texas at that time. And they said, well, where would you want to go at? Where do you want me to bring your household? I want to go back to Georgetown. And I say all that to say, Bethel is one of the best churches that I've ever been in my entire life. Even if you look at the building, that's why they out there on the historical tour. People come, when they come into Georgetown, they don't go to every church in Georgetown. They go to the historical one that looks like a cathedral. And the organ there, when you walk in there and you see the pipe organs, and you just don't see that in churches nowadays. And so for that reason, I am proud to be an affiliate of Bethel, a graduate from Bethel, and thank you all. I want to say it's been a plum-pleasing pleasure as well as a privilege to be able to tell you a little bit about Bethel. I could go on, but I think my time is up, and I don't want Ms. Clark to tell me to sit down. But thank you all so much.
Well, thank you, Reverend Johnson. And I was trying to make eye contact with him, but he kept looking down and around, so it didn't work. But his words, they yet still touch my heart. To think that Bethel played such a vital role in his life. it moves me as the pastor to continue that kind of a legacy, to make sure that it's beyond the four walls that we serve, and to be sure that our heart is pure and that which we do, that we do it for the glory of God and not the applause of men. Well, our next panelist is a man of few words. At the end of our time together, each of you will be given a copy of this. It is the outpouring of my having been invited to share today, and then my inviting this panel of individuals to come and share along with us. Let me just say that the Reverend Dr. Sandy Drayton is listed here on the back, and it was his desire to be here, but beyond his control, he could not make it today. That's the empty fourth chair, but Elder Drayton grew up in Bethel, and he is a product that has done well for himself, for he is now leadership beyond Bethel, and that is part of our criteria, is to make the best better. As I said, our next panelist is Brother Steve, and Brother Steve will come, and he will look in my eyes. Give him a hand. Give him a hand.
Bob, Harold Jean, I like the irony of a preacher saying he's a man of few words. When she said that, I thought lightning is coming, you know. As she said, first of all, it's an honor to be here. I want to thank Bob and everyone else. Most of you know me. We do have this for you, so what I will be I've been charged to talk about the history of Bethel, and we do have this. Some of you will get a smaller version, but a larger. We made two printings, but it's all the same. So, Reverend Charles and I, we had already, Reverend Johnson is a good friend of mine, and I like the story that he told when he was attending Bethel's Youth Congress in Columbia. But he left out one key ingredient why teenagers love to go there, and that's the girls. He kind of cleaned that up a little bit. They would come back and say, man, did you see those girls? And then everybody was a Christian, you know. I want to go next year. So you left that out, Charles. All right. I'm going to read from my book it's called Ebony Effects. And thank you, I do have books in the back. I've written extensively about Bethel. Both of my parents were raised here in Georgetown and attended Bethel. My dad not only attended Bethel, he was at one time the assistant pastor of Bethel. So I perhaps know a little bit more about Bethel than I know about any other church, but that is not to say there hasn't been or there is not great other African-American institutions in Georgetown. The only thing that distinguishes, not the only, but the main thing that distinguishes Bethel from any other African-American church or institution is that they were the first. There's something to be said about the first, whether your name is Jackie Robinson or what have you. Here's what I said about Bethel in my book. They waited. For 250 years, they governed their Christian tongues, disciplined their disappointment, and waited for their chance to show what they could do. Finally, in 1863, they got this chance. So what would you call an institution that consistently fields extraordinary educators and politicians, dedicated doctors and nurses, talented writers and publishers, creative contractors and builders, and legendary leaders and entrepreneurs, and powerful preachers and civil rights activists? Well, I don't know about you, but I would call it Bethel A.M.E. In 1863, with the ugly scars of slavery indelibly printed on their minds, a small group of progressive Christians moved in one accord to organize Bethel African Methodist Episcopal Church. Now, Bethel not only became the first black sanctuary in Georgetown, but the first organization of any kind that was owned and controlled by blacks in Georgetown. However, without schools and without social centers, the church became the vocal point for the community activities. Now, you have to understand that Bethel preacher, and he's going to be in here, you'll be able to read just about everything I have to say, was named Augustus T. Carr, C-A-R-R. Before the war and during the war, he was a merchant who made a good living with a livery stable right there on Front and Broad Street. But during the war, the Confederate Army confiscated all of his animals and left him penniless. Now you say, was he not picking rice? No, all blacks were not rice pickers. There were a few, not that many, but a few free blacks. He happened to be one of them. And after the war, he thought it not robbery to go and organize and establish Bethel A.M.E. Church. Now, where was he before them? He was an ordained minister in the Methodist Church. Which Methodist church, Steve? Duncan Memorial Church, literally 2.5 blocks from where Bethel is today. And I just want to quickly read what the AME elders had to say about him before we get into a little bit about the history. But I found this interesting. The South Carolina district was organized this is the AME. You understand the AME was more prominent up north because, well, you know the reason. All right. The South Carolina district was organized in May of 1865. Having settled, in the meantime, his affairs, Reverend A.T. Carr, Augustus Thomas Carr, cast his lot as a regular itinerant and was at once ordained an elder. At the conference in 1865, he was made superintendent of very important district, okay? Now, this is what I like what they had to say about him. When such men as A.T. Carr and another gentleman named Bradwell Vanderhurst, and scores of others rallied to be the standard, the cause of African American was made secure in South Carolina. Reverend A.T. Carr is a respectable English scholar. He reads fluently, writes readily, and does both with more accuracy than is usual for a man of his advantages. An earnest preacher, a hard-working pastor, he is destined yet to leave his footprints upon the African American church. So Reverend A.T. Carr was no shrinking violet. He was known throughout the state and maybe throughout the South. Okay, let's get into some of the people who have made Bethel great. It was Dr. Martin Luther King that says that human progress never rolls in on the wheels of inevitability. Rather, it comes from the tireless and persistent work of men and women who are willing to be co-workers with God. And I always like something my dad used to say from the time I was a boy. Couldn't even understand what he was saying, but he always quoted the second stanzas of the Negro National Anthem, or Lift Every Voice in Faith. And it goes like this: stony the road we trod, bitter the chastening rod, born on the days when hope unborn had died, yet with a steady beat have not our weary feet felt in the days when hope unborn had died, yet with a steady beat have not our weary feet come to a place from which our fathers sighed. So when you get this, and let me just say how much I love, and I do mean love, the poem that Sister Eunice read. It is extremely apropos. The first person that I highlight here, I'll tell you a little bit about him. His name is William Albert Sinclair. William Albert Sinclair was born in Georgetown in 1858. However, shortly after that, his family was split up. Slavery, institutionalized slavery was still going on. And they sold he and his mother to someplace else and his father someplace else. After the war, they were reunited. and he was overjoyed to have his father back with him again, except during this time, a group of a hate mob lynched his dad. And what that did to him as a little boy, he said something that I have in my book called All That Is Necessary for Evil to Flourish is for good men to do nothing. And so I put in here that William Alvin Sinclair was a good man who encountered things, bad things. What is his claim to fame? First claim to fame. And when I say this, I'm just talking about people who just by the grace of God who attended Bethel. I marvel at how many great men and women came through Bethel. Okay, what was his claim to fame? He was one of the few blacks that was able to go to South Carolina University when the doors were finally open right after the war. But then, after the Union Army left, they slammed the door and he was crushed because he couldn't graduate. So where did he go? He went to Howard. Get this, he went to Howard and received this degree. He went to Meharry Medical University, received another degree. He went to the Andover Theological Seminary, received another degree. What am I saying? He received 4 degrees. But his claim to fame was he was one of the original members, one of the founding members of the NAACP. All right? I already told you about Augusta Carr. We'll talk about a little bit about James Bowley. Some of you who've been around Georgetown a while, you know that I talk a lot about James Bowley because I'm very proud of him. I didn't know that he was a member of Bethel. James Bowley he and his sister and his mother were the first people rescued on Harriet Tubman's famed Underground Railroad. But what I like about it, when she did it in December of 1850, she had no idea how long African Americans would be enslaved, how the Union would win, and what James' life would turn out to be. Well, if you fast forward from 1850 to 1867, he came to Georgetown again with the Freedmen's Bureau and made a name for himself. What did he do, Steve? Well, he came as a teacher and helped the sharecroppers negotiate decent contracts. Why? Because he became the 20th black person in the state of South Carolina to become a lawyer. After that, he was commissioner. He helped open schools for the Freedmen Bureaus. Then he became the commissioner. Then he went to the South Carolina State Legislature. Then he became the chairman of the Ways and Means, Ching. And then he became, he opened up a newspaper. Then he became a probate judge. I say all that to say this because Harriet Tubman did not know what he would be. He could have grown up to be anybody. He could have been homeless, he could have been an alcoholic, he could have been a number of things. But she was so proud of him because he tried to do right. Not just for his people, but for all of South Carolina. All right? Moving on right quick. George E. Harriet. Who was he? George E. Harriet is known for 2 things. First thing he's known for is fashioning a political agreement between the black race and the white race of Georgetown. And what did he do? He came up with something called the Fusion Agreement, which was an unwritten agreement to agree to not agree. And in other words, they would decide on a political candidate and who would be the choice, and it would not be contested. So there was no confrontations between the races. And David Drayton, one of the heroes in this book, some of you have heard that name, legendary in Georgetown, said that racial harmony lasted longer in Georgetown than in any other place in the South because of that fusion agreement. And that fusion agreement went all the way up to 1895 between the races. And it's true. I used to ask my dad. He used to say, it was segregated, but we didn't have it as bad as Mississippi or some of the other places, okay? So that was his first claim to fame. His second claim to fame is that he was the superintendent of the Georgetown County Schools. And what he did was he lowered the illiteracy rate from 78%, almost 80%, to 52% in less than 30 years as a superintendent because he was serious about education. Another educator who attended Bethel, Robert Anderson. Robert Anderson was a savvy legislator. This is during the Reconstruction period and after. Well, I'll just briefly tell you that if you or you know anybody who attended South Carolina State College in Orangeburg, it was Robert Anderson who actually is responsible for that being a college. How did he do that? He was one of 6 legislators slated to go to the South Carolina Constitutional Convention of 1895. Only 6, only one from Georgetown. The rest were very, 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 very prominent blacks. He went there and they eloquently spoke, each of them, at this convention about trying to roll back, Bob, the coming black codes. Black codes that was threatening to erase all of the gains that blacks had gained after the war. They failed, 116-7. But what Robert Anderson did, he had another political trick up his sleeve. He decided that he would take advantage of a situation that was going on. Some of you who you know your history know that almost all of the black schools in the South were established by northern denominations, okay? Almost all of them. But that caused a lot of tension because they were trying to teach the black students that there's such a thing as social equality, and some couldn't have that. And so at that convention, and he said, well, the remedy to these schools controlling the black population, teaching them about social equality, is to start another school that is run by blacks in the South, Southern blacks. And that is how South Carolina State was created. And I'm proud of that because Robert Anderson is buried just a few blocks from here. The next one is a fellow by the name of John Brownsfield. John Brownsfield was a barber on Front Street. And on Front Street, he was he was approached by a deputized sheriff for not paying a $1 poll tax. Now, my research said that he did pay it, but it was never recorded. Make a long story short, this guy put a gun to his head and threatened him, and a scuffle broke out, and the sheriff was shot, okay? Now, Brownsfield tried to run, but a black policeman found him 2 blocks away, and he said, man, what's going on? And he explained to him what had just happened. He took him to jail. And while he was in jail, the constable brother and some other members of that community decided they were going to do what was quite common at that time. They were going to get him out of jail and lynch him. Bethel, led by women, decided, no, I don't know the reason, but they said, not tonight. And I'm told from history, and I didn't write this, Walter Cronkite wrote it. No, if you know anything about the great historian of Georgetown, a fellow by the name of George C. Rogers, he's written the most definitive book on Georgetown. You can read it there. You can read it in my book too. But it was the women. They had pitchforks and knives and weapons, and they marched right from Broad Street to where it used to be the old library. That was the jailhouse, okay? And they said not tonight because they were going to lynch him. Had it not been for Bethel, they would have lynched him. His case went all the way up to the Supreme Court. Florence Williams, no relationships, I don't think. Florence Williams had a dream. God visited her in the form of an angel one night in her dreams. And in her dreams, God said to her, she was a nurse, there's a great work for you to do, but you cannot do it unless I help you. You must always put me first. Florence Williams went home, pondered that dream, didn't tell anybody. Soon the hospital she was working in closed down, but a white doctor, I forget the E.F. Bell, I think the F.E. Bell, said, listen, I've got this young man, he's got lockjaw, little black boy, I know you're a great nurse, and if you would take care of him, he would get well. Florence agreed, and she took care of him, and he got well. She took that as a sign that God wanted her to do something. What was that something? Develop a hospital, establish a hospital. From 1925 to 1954, which is the year the Georgetown Hospital was established, it was Florence Williams, only the third hospital in Georgetown. But what I like about it, she took care of poor people at a time when no one else would. You have to remember, that was during the Great Depression. Georgetown was poor before, during, and after the Great Depression. So you know it was bad. CCC, Civilian Conservation Corps. They built all of this stuff you see from here to Little Neck, all right? But at one time, it was just woods. And so when the conservation workers got hurt, they had to go to a colored hospital. The only colored hospital from here to Florence or Charleston was Florence Williams. Never charged them a nickel. Had surgery there, black and white doctors, okay? Another friend of mine who went to Bethel said, Steve, at the time, if you got injured or hurt and you needed an ambulance, there was no ambulance service. You had to drive in a hearse or a mortuary, okay? Stony the road, we tried.
Barbecue.
All right?
Barbecue.
Barbecue. Yes, okay. I don't know what that means.
Okay,
I know what it means. She couldn't wait to give me the hook. All right. Joseph Beck. The school district is named after him. You can read about it. James Pralo. You can read about it. Lawrence Dunmore. Barbara Hugh. You can read about it. Oh, she don't want me to speak, period. All right.
now I wanted you to talk about Barbara to equal the plane with male and female as you conclude.
Male and female. Male and female.
As you conclude.
Help me understand something. Is Florence Williams a male or female? All right.
Equal.
Barbara Hugh, father, William Hugh, Wow, I'm sorry, established before the funeral industry or parlor or mortuary. Before then, he was a merchant who did very well. He had several stores on what is now called the West Side. And inside of that, he started making boxes, for funerals. And he said, well, I'm going to go full-time into that business. And for well over 100 years, Barbara Hugh, mortuary. Barbara's still living. You all know her. She owns property and very prominent in Georgetown. Her organization did it, but she did it. She came back to Georgetown because her grandfather had died, senior, and her father was ill. So like Charles said, so many people comes back to Georgetown, and I applaud people who come back to take care of their family in their time of need. And she decided to stay. She was doing very well in Atlanta. She was connected with Julian Bond and several other prominent blacks. She had a school. She did very well. But Barbara is one of the historians that's given me a lot of information in several of my books, and I've leaned on her. But again, the rest of the story you can read. Let me move on to Sam Bonds. Sam Bonds is a cousin of mine. He was a merchant. What I like about Sam Bonds, he was the second person elected to the city council after almost 100 years, 75 years. But Sam Bonds opened up his businesses to the black community during segregation and Jim Crow. And so when blacks couldn't go into certain places, Sam Bonds said, you can come into my club or my organization. He also helped build housing. Last two is a fellow by the name of David Drayton. Many of you know David Drayton as the principal of the legendary Howard High School, but David Drayton was probably the best historian that I ever personally met. He's forgotten more about history than I will ever know. And I sat down with him many times. His claim to fame, at least in here, is that he developed a community. He developed in Maryville something called a subdivision because he had property. And I might as well tell you, because it's no secret, after the Civil War, a lot of the property that used to belong to slave owners and enslaved people were somehow removed from them, I'll put it that way. So the Grand Strand, what we see it now, used to be all plantations. But during the war, many of the blacks and whites went north and somehow lost a lot of that property. Today, that property, as you know, is worth millions. The condominiums, a home, the golf courses, and all of that. But David Drayton was a success story, along with Mackenzie Beach, because that property had been in their family. And he said, I tell you what I'm going to do. I'm going to start a subdivision. He had several acres, and he invited a lot of his friends. Almost all of them were professionals, teachers and lawyers and doctors. And that community is still, it's called the Virginia Heights community. It's still there in Maryville. And lastly, the Bethel Apartments, which is on Gilbert Street in Georgetown. Bethel thought it not robbery in 1966 to open up affordable housing for the community of Georgetown. And if you go up there now, it is still, 50 years later, it is still one of the best communities, well kept. We ain't talking about a slum now. We're talking about for people who need it for. So for all those who say affordable housing is going to deteriorate and turn, not necessarily so. All right? So I said all that to say this, because I see you looking at me.
I'm looking down.
Good,
I'm getting up.
because I ain't looking that way. I'm like Bob, I'm just smiling. All right. I say all that to say this. Bethel has helped the community, not just the black community, but all of the community. When you are with the NAACP, people don't understand. Yes, it's black face, but NAACP was never a traditional black community as an organization. It was started by a Caucasian woman. My dad used to tell me that. There's a lot of things that help every race, Latino, black, or whatever other ethnicity we have in Georgetown. And they didn't have to do it. Also, Bethel, in the early stages, helped open other churches. Arnett, Dickinson, Stevenson AME, okay? Because at that time, the roads weren't paved and some of the bridges were not built and they couldn't get to Georgetown. Bethel has done a lot. I'm very proud of Bethel. Again, because of the men and women who were there. And I thank you for your patience.
We thank God for Steve. Let me say on a very serious note, one, we were allotted 50 minutes, and I try to be true to my word and stick with it. So I got a few minutes left. I think I want to open up for question and answers for my panel. There will only be a few questions and short answers, but yes, Ben.
Pastor Johnson did not explain how he got into the Baptist church.
How do I? But when I got into the Baptist church, I had just left the military, and I got with the AME, and the AME had a rigorous, credible program to get their pastors ordained. The Baptist church is different. If you say God called you, and you have someone to speak for you, you can be ordained. The AME is quite different, quite different. And at my age, when I chose to take my calling, I knew I didn't have a lot of years. I had more years behind me than in front of me. So I said, well, I better get the first door that's going to open. But since that time, I've talked to a lot of the people in the AME, and they've said, well, why don't you come on back home? Sandy Drayton said, aren't you tired? Come on back home, man. But and I do miss the AME. Thank you very much for that question.
Do we have another question? Anyone? Well, let me just simply say, in the words of Fanny Crosby, who was a blind hymn writer, she said, "This is my story. This is my song." Well, this is our story, at least a reflection thereof, a glimpse thereof. And if you want to know more about our history, Steve has several books. If you love the poetry, Ms. Brown has several books. And Reverend Johnson.
Doesn't need a preacher.
You can call either him or I, thank you. But it is with the abundance of joy that I applaud this panel, and I ask that you would join me in applauding them collectively.
At least let them know about my wife and the business that she owns on Front Street. Been there for 14 and a half years.
And the name is?
Arnie's Restaurant. We've been there 14 and a half years. And we're also known for having the Georgetown big feeding on Thanksgiving. And Steve,
1,112.
that's how much we fed this year.
Vanessa Green is a member of Bethel, and she has something she'd like to share. Vanessa?
Do I?
You said you wanted to make an announcement?
Oh, yes. So I've been taking pictures since I was 3 years old, and I have a fascination with photography. And so Bethel, very fortunately, has a wonderful, wonderful trove of historic photographs. And so in celebration of our 160th anniversary, we're going to produce a photo book. It's on the planning stages right now. And we're going to present a wonderful, wonderful exhibit. So I hope that you guys just stay, looking forward to that. We'll probably do that sometime this fall, perhaps. But, and many of our photographs are stored here at the library. So you can talk to the librarians here. We have wonderful archives of wonderful, amazing historic pictures.
And stored in their homes.
Excuse me?
And stored in their homes.
Absolutely. In fact, one of the things that we're doing for people who have photographs, we're asking them to bring them forward and allow us to copy them so that we might include those pictures that are now in people's homes into our photo archives. So, thank you. Thank you.
Well, as a result of COVID-19, church attendance for all of us has diminished, but the influence and power of the Black church, it is yet still a force to be reckoned with. Because the Black church, as I said in the beginning, has been our refuge and our sanctuary. And not only for African Americans, but for the whosoever that would come, our doors were and yet still is always open. Bethel A.M.E. Church is relevant to our past, our present, and our future. The doors of the church of Bethel, they're always open, and we'd love for you. Come on in.
What a wonderful morning this has been. What a wonderful presentation. Dr. Clark, I thank you. Esteemed panel, I do thank you as well. This has been very, very special. As with all of our presentations, we have recorded this and we'll have it available. We'll send out word that'll be available on Facebook. And it's a great way to review, go back over, and share with others. You missed a good presentation. You ought to watch this on Facebook. So we look forward to being able to share that with you. We handed out, I think most people were able to get a copy of our upcoming events. Through the rest of our year, we operate in a similar way to schools, where we go from the fall to the spring. And so up through May, a number of events that I just want to make you aware of. One is we have an annual meeting every year, and we know full well that a business meeting is not a draw. We have, by our bylaws, a requirement to have an annual meeting, and it's a good time just to share a little bit about how we've been doing in our financial accountability to you, to the community, to our friends, to the library. We give financial report and so forth. That's brief. But in addition to that, what we also have is presentation, a special presentation, and this year we're going to be having Kamichia Johnson, who is the author of this wonderful children's book, but she speaks to parents and grandparents on how to encourage young people, how to build up their self-esteem, and how we can play a significant role with our young people today, something I know many of us have a burden for and really are concerned about. So Kamichia is going to be here speaking. We'll be having our business meeting. It's 1 week from today, from 4:30 in the afternoon till 6 o'clock. So brief business meeting, and I do the eye thing too. A brief business meeting, and then Kamichia sharing with us, and we have food, so there's a little bit of snack. We do all the bribery we possibly can. We have...
Can I just add one
Sure.
other thing? No, you stay. Bethel is producing a cookbook. It should be out in the next 2 or 3 weeks. The cost of the book is $16 in line with our 160th anniversary. Please, 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 if you can, if you will, purchase one of those books. You can stop by the church office at any day, any time. Between the hours of 9:30 and 2:30, the office is open, and you can call first to make sure that the book is there, and then purchase as many copies as you dare. Thank you.
And it's $1 cheaper than what will be the 170th anniversary. So get it now. Prices will be going up. Also to mention, as it's on that schedule there as well, we continue our Tuesdays with schedule. It's always the third Tuesday of the month at 10 o'clock here. Next month, poetry. We're going to be having Libby Bernadine, who's going to be here sharing with us her most recent book, House in Need of Mooring. And then in April, Raising a Gullah Garden. Right, Tim? Tim Chapman and Zenobia are going to be doing a presentation on the garden, how to have a Gullah garden, and what that entails from their own experiences, which will be wonderful. And then Robin Salmon is going to be here in the month of May. Many of you know her from her position, significant position at Brook Green Garden. And she's going to be speaking on one aspect of the art at Brook Green Garden. If you think she's going to speak on all of it, you better bring lunch. But a wonderful presentation that will be. And then something we've been doing for a while, which is a community service in some way, but a wonderful way to bring community together, is we have in the fall and again in the spring a community yard sale. And we invite people in the community to come and get a parking space or 2 parking spaces to sell. We do all the marketing, advertising. You don't have people treading all over your lawn or your driveway. And we get a great group of people. We've had 20 to 30 different people come and sell. We have food, we have people who sell food, we have cookies and all kinds of wonderful time. And that's scheduled for March 18th with a rain date of March 25th. We have some posters for those. If you would like to have a poster and put it up someplace, if you know someplace where you'd like to do that, I've got extras of those to be able to hand out. And you can come. Come either to sell or to buy, and either way is wonderful. I do want to mention the books as well. We have Steve's books are in the back. Especially, can I especially recommend? Ebony Effects is really an excellent book from which he was quoting on Black history here in Georgetown, and a lot of stories you'll not hear or see anyplace else. Just a wonderful way to understand that component, that significant component of the history of Georgetown. And his most recent book, The Overcomers, which are a collection of some of the essays that through the years have been published in the newspaper and now through Gab that he has been publishing, and some of the best that he considers, and I'd recommend that. And you have books of poetry as well. I saw that and want to make sure if you're interested in Miss Brown's poetry books, she has those. So up front, we have books everywhere. This is great. And out there's a library. To all of you, thanks so much. And again, Dr. Clark and esteemed panel, thank you for a wonderful morning.